Then I suddenly realized I can't read it myself.
Oh, yeah.
I have no idea what's on my
Mm.
body. So I felt a bit foolish. And so I started off with just the letters, and I thought, okay, R. I felt maybe I meet somebody that's Georgian.
Welcome to another episode of the Caucasus podcast. My name is Asha Juba. I am the Georgian language teacher, author of Georgian study books, as well as political scientist specializing in the Caucasus region, and the owner of Języki Kaukazu, Languages of the Caucasus. And today, in our podcast, in the Caucasus podcast, we will talk about Georgian language. Exactly. And I will be joining our guest in a second because today we will talk with Mr. Smith from the YouTube channel Paraskevia. Maybe you know him already. We will be talking about learning Georgian. Exactly. And about our paths, how we started learning Georgian, what are the tips and tricks we can both share from our experience, a little bit about study books, a little bit about whether Georgian language is difficult and hard to learn, or is it a myth? So we will tackle that as well. And we'll talk also about differences in learning Georgian based on the mother tongue or other languages that you already know. What is helping, what you can add like additional tips and tricks when learning. So about this we will talk in today's episode of the Caucasus podcast as well. Remember that each and every episode of our podcast is not only on YouTube, but it's also as an audio version on the podcasting applications and on our website on języknikaukazu.pl. You will find there as well not only this episode but also the transcript, the written version of this episode. And remember, if you like our podcasts, help us creating next episode. So the link how to do it, how to support the podcast, you will find as well in the description of today's episode. Okay, so it's time to invite our guests. So I hope you will enjoy our conversation. Hello, Mr. Smith.
Gamarjoba, hello.
Gamarjova. Yeah, so welcome.
Gamarjoba, Rokuchar.
Karga, Chena Gorkhar.
Aromishas, Gargarvar, Magloba.
Oh, so this is the beginning because you will already know, our listeners to the Caucasus podcast, maybe you know already what we'll be talking about, exactly Georgian language and learning Georgian language. So we have like perfect introduction to this topic. Hello. I'm very happy that you are here with us and you got the invitation for us to meet with me today and talk about exactly how it is to learn language from the foreigner's perspective. Yeah, because we have different mother tongues as well. So I hope for our listeners of the podcast and viewers on YouTube, it will be also maybe interesting as well. And the comparison we'll try to share with you today.
I was just going to say, yeah, it's really interesting, of course, because the amount of people making content in the Georgian language is not a lot, there's not that massive amount. And so just thank you very much for inviting me. It's just really nice. I follow your content too. And I like your material and your classes, and they make a lot of sense to me as well. Like when I need a bit of a boost, it's nice to see other people producing content. I remember when you recommended my channel, that was like, it was a really big moment for me. It was like really made me feel great. And then all the progress of your book, buying your book and everything and using your book as well, it's really, really good. So it's a privilege to be on your podcast as well. I'm very much looking forward to it and sharing a few of our stories, I guess, as to how we got where we were and how we are proceeding with the Georgian language for people that are still, I don't know, maybe losing confidence or trying to find motivation or just, perhaps need a little bit more of a push. How did we get where we were? So that also interests me too.
Yes, I hope that you will get as well, our viewers and listeners as well, from us today, a little bit of the stories. I noticed that from some of you also sharing with us that when in general either I talk or you as well talk about what is our path and our journey with Georgian language, it helps many people and motivates them. So, oh yes, it is possible. So let's start maybe from that perspective. So how did really your journey and all the fun part with Georgian language started, or when how is it that Georgian right now and maybe Georgia in general is in your life?
Yeah, that's it's such an interesting question, and it's not the first time people ask me, and it's quite unique. Even my own family ask the same question. They're like, "Why? What are you doing?" You know, and I think the origin story is really, really simple. I got a tattoo, and I always wanted to have this tattoo, and it says "No hope and no fear." Right? That was what I wanted, but in English, it just looks really tasteless on my body. And I'm a teacher. I work in education. I work with kids. So to write no hope and no fear, I thought it was provocative. And I just don't like tattoos like that. So I never thought about it again. But I also speak Spanish, and I thought, okay, maybe in Spanish. But then I changed my mind, and I was like, ni esperanzas ni miedos. In Spanish, I was like, no. Then I moved to a German-speaking country, so I was learning German, and like keine Hoffnung and kein Angst. It just didn't look good. But then, ta-da!
Oh yeah,
I had it done
different
in
different
Georgia,
level, yeah,
and
different level of
yeah,
tattoos,
it
yeah.
just looked so beautiful. And that was the origin story. Is like I was teaching in Vienna. I'd never imagined I would be learning Georgian. I was already learning German, and German is my third language,
Hmm.
which might have been my hobby for life because German is tough. So but that is my hobby. I like to learn languages. And so anyway, I was sitting in this classroom. I met this guy. He was super nice. His name was Irakli, and he was like, "I'm from Tbilisi." And I'm thinking, oh my God, I know so little about Georgia. I didn't know much to say. And so he showed me the Anbani, and I
Hmm.
thought, now that's something I've not seen. And 1 year before, I was in Ukraine for a month, and I was there listening to Ukrainian, listening to the Russian language. I thought, it's about time I challenged myself. And I lost interest in Ukrainian. And then I thought, oh my God, I think I can do both. I can get this tattoo, and no one's going to be able to read it in my classroom. No one can read Artsa Shishi Artsa Imedi. So I thought, I've got it. So I found a graphic designer, and I tattooed it on my body. Artsa Shishi Artsa Imedi. That was my slogan. Carpe diem. That was me. And I was happy like that. Then I suddenly realized I can't read it myself.
Oh yeah.
I have no idea what's on my
Mhm.
body. So I felt a bit foolish. And so I started off with just the letters, and I thought, okay, R. I felt maybe I meet somebody that's Georgian. I thought, and at that time, you probably know in your own journey, Georgians traveling to Europe wasn't as frequent as it is now. We're talking about 2017. Georgians weren't traveling that much. Wizz Air still wasn't operating from Kutaisi, and Wizz Air is the really cheap airline. So
Yeah.
tickets to Europe were expensive, and Georgians weren't traveling. And they'd only recently got these 3-month visas as well, within a European time frame. So I thought, no, Georgians, I'm never going to meet Georgian people. I'm never going to go to Georgia. That's obviously not what happened. So the answer to the question is that it started off as a tattoo, and I thought, I can't read my own tattoo.
Yeah.
And I felt like I'm such an idiot. I thought, what if I meet somebody Georgian and they go, oh, what does that say? Oh, that's so beautiful. I'm like, spaghetti, spaghetti, spaghetti. My friend is from Krakow. He's Polish, and the first time he saw the Georgian language, he was like, that just looks like spaghetti.
Yeah,
So that's
many people from Poland they say so. Yeah, it looks a little bit like noodles. Yes,
noodles,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So like, and he's a very good friend of mine, and he speaks very good English, So he just said, it's like, Dale, you're crazy, like whatever. I'm not interested in that language. Polish already hard enough, like I don't need anything. But I was very lucky to have him because when I was learning the cases,
Mm, yeah,
oh my God, I needed his help because he understood the case system when I didn't know it. So,
yes.
so that was the origin story, no? And then I thought, okay, I'm going to learn how to read my tattoo. And then I decided I would go to Georgia. I was actually visiting my friends. I had friends in Georgia. I had one business contact in Baku, and I was just going to go through. And so I arrived in Tbilisi. I already had the tattoo, and for a man that speaks English, Spanish, and German, I was completely drowning. I had no idea
Yes,
what was
I
going
can
on.
imagine. Yeah.
I was like, and no one understood me really. They did try to speak English with me, but
Mm.
I thought, this is really, this is such a challenge. And I think I started to become very stubborn.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I'm not going to let this beat me. Because after 1 month in Ukraine the year before, I was actually quite able to read the Ukrainian language. I could see photo, internet, a couple of easy English words
Yes.
in the Russian language were easy for me to read, although the script had changed. But Georgian was giving me zero. And so stubbornly, when I returned to Austria, I thought, I'm going to go back and I'm going to know a couple of words.
No.
Because obviously I don't, and it was such a great holiday. I was in Tbilisi. I went to Batumi. It was the right time. The weather was perfect. I loved everything about it. I loved the churches and the people and the culture. It reminded me of Spain. It was so alien and so enjoyable, and it blew me away, you know. And I was like, I want to go back because I really enjoyed myself, but I also want to go back because I stubbornly don't want to be there. And I remember trying to catch marshrukas, thinking, where on earth am I? So that was how it started. So then I started to
Mm.
learn the alphabet. That
Oh,
was it,
okay.
Anbani. I
Mm-hmm.
started with the Anbani. I
Yeah.
fell in love with the language, put it on my body as a tattoo, and I was satisfied with just the Anbani
Yeah.
in the beginning.
So this is, I would say, when you said about this tattoo and you couldn't read it, I thought like there is no fear, but it was a little bit scary that you don't know what is written. Like in
Yeah,
theory, it should be what you want, but I think the same sometimes happens with people who are in Georgia, and there's like as you mentioned, there's nothing written about the names of the cities in other language or in other alphabet that it is in Georgian, and people have no idea. Yeah, so that is why it's useful to start with the alphabet. Then you can at least read it and compare it with something else. Yeah, that's
I
great.
just
So, yeah.
I just couldn't believe it. I was like, I cannot comprehend. And I understood there was I knew I would never understand Chinese. I
Mm-hmm.
knew I would never understand Korean. I was in India for 6 weeks. I didn't understand Tamil Nadu, some of these beautiful scripts. But for some reason, stubbornly, because I tattooed myself,
Yeah,
I
that's
thought,
the best
and I was like,
motivation. Yeah.
yeah, at the very least, I'm going to be able to say artsa, she, artsa. That was very lucky because it was the same word twice.
Yes. No,
And
that's-
she is sh-i. So I was on the lowest level of commitment. I only needed to learn 8 letters and I was done. And imedi.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was. I committed to this much Georgian,
So it's like
but
step by step, small steps. Take small,
yeah, it
small
really
steps.
started off as
Yeah.
a little seed of don't want to be that classic British guy with a tattoo in another language that he himself can't read.
Oh, yeah. That is it. That is kind of cliche. Yeah, that happens.
But that's
Yeah,
the story. That's the origin story.
yeah,
Yeah, and I
great.
was like,
That's
oh, I feel so
awesome.
stupid, And people have like Chinese things,
Yes.
and they're like, they think it means like courage, but actually it means porridge
Yeah. Or soup. Yes, exactly.
or soup.
Yeah.
So I was like, I need to know that at the very least. If I ever meet a Georgian person again.
Oh,
Little did I know, here I am in Batumi now with a YouTube channel that's quite successful, speaking and talking to my friends and absolutely living a completely different chapter of my life. So it's interesting, isn't it, that sometimes they say tattoos mean something. This tattoo couldn't mean more to me than it does right now.
yeah.
It
It changed
started a new
everything.
chapter in my
Yeah.
life. Yeah, yeah. So that's the answer to your question. It
No.
started then.
That's awesome story, really. That's like I know some people who have tattoos in Jordan, but in majority of the stories it happens opposite. Like they start learning
Mm.
and then they like the alphabet. Shout out to
Ah,
some of my students who know who you are, and then
cool.
they want to have it and tattoo something because exactly like you said, I like or love even the alphabets, the Albani Georgian alphabet. Yeah, so that's the situation. my story was I feel completely different because I was like, it was never a question. I just knew I need to learn Georgian. I was not even thinking like what is there and whether it's like beautiful or not. It happens
Hmm.
later on. Yeah, as being a political scientist, I knew that I have to speak the language that's of the country I'm analyzing. So I have to know that. So that's always fascinating for me. What are the stories, like how it happened and how everything started there. Yeah,
It's
that's crazy.
interesting,
Yeah.
isn't it? You have to do that. I would imagine, in my case, being a native English speaker, I would expect a lot of the books and a lot of the literature to be in English anyway. It's
Yes.
very easy for an English speaking person to skip that chapter. But obviously, if your native language is Polish, you don't necessarily need English at all.
Yeah,
Why would you?
in theory, yes, but many people like from Poland, they know English, and then
Mhm.
in general, my idea is that if you want to know the country, as you mentioned, that you want to talk to Georgians, it's great when you have possibility to at least more or less understand what they're talking about. As you
Mhm.
mentioned after your trip, yeah, you don't want all the time to someone has to translate it for you, and you can to some extent at least participate in this dialogue or whatever is going on, no matter the situation. You can help yourself in different situations, like it's simple to say please stop in marshrutka. Yeah, so that's already can be a challenge.
Gotcha.
It
You
can
know,
be.
like, but you're right. It's like I think for another thing as well, Asia, is that when I travel alone. I often travel alone. I like to be invisible. I don't like to be visible, and being unable to communicate and only speaking in English puts a massive, like, bright spotlight on me.
Yeah.
And so, being able to speak a language, I mean, obviously, I lived 10 years in Spain, and I learned Spanish in Spain. I followed the same ideas as you. To integrate, you have to make the effort to learn. Same thing in German. I speak German now, you know. Perhaps I feel that German was a little bit, it was definitely my hobby, but I ran out of interest. But I was living in Vienna.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it made me feel, I felt so exposed in Georgia without speaking any Georgian. And for me being speaking three languages, I felt like almost a bit embarrassed. Like I can't do any, and the fact that I'm a linguist and I teach English, to be so unable, I was like, Dale, shame on you. You have to try harder if you're ever going to go back. So that's what I did. It was a bit of me telling myself that I can do it and not letting Georgian defeat me as well. Because trust me, when I started and I saw 33 characters, I nearly dropped dead.
Really? Oh, yeah. That's what I wanted to ask you, because also you mentioned the cases. So, what were your struggles when you started? That I'm also curious, and from your perspective, also having your mother tongue different than Georgian, because like, as you mentioned, like for me, from like Polish is my first language, and then I know a little bit of Russian and some German as well. So, some ideas or grammatical ideas on the concepts are not that shocking. I would say some of them are, but but it's not that many. I'm curious how it was, yeah, from your perspective. How what were the struggles, the first ones, or maybe the biggest ones that you had?
Mm. I think you're always trying to find a parallel or an equivalent with
Yeah.
the English having most of their transformations on vowel sounds. The consonant sounds are just quite limited. So I was just looking for equivalents. I think for me, I was quite lucky in Wales. We have a r sound and we have a ch sound. Because
Mm.
although I am coming from an English language perspective, that's why I make sure I say that. I am not an English teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Welsh English teacher,
Oh, yeah.
and I grew up in Wales. And Wales is a bilingual world. Everything is written in two languages in Wales. We have the English words and we have the Welsh words. So we learn as children, although we skip it, we only use English. The Welsh words are everywhere. So I had ch, but I also had that from Spanish. And so that was how I started to like, ani, bani. But obviously the adjectives, the ones with the k and the t and the ch and the k, those were the ones which got me really confused. And I could hear the difference. It wasn't that I couldn't hear the difference. The question was I didn't know where
Mm-hmm.
to
To make that sound, yeah.
to bring it out.
Yeah.
And so luckily, it came across me. I thought this sounds like beatboxing when we were kids, like
Oh.
like kids pretending they were beatboxers in the early 90s, because I was born in 1980. So, in the early 90s, beatboxing kids did it, and it created these sounds. And I thought, okay, it still wasn't, I tried my hardest. I really did. But at the same time, I was working just on Anbani. And I think that might be my first tip,
Hmm.
to anyone that's listening to our podcast and just trying to figure out how do they get to our level, perhaps. You've got to learn to write the alphabet. You
Yes.
can't skip it. It's just don't skip it. Don't think I'll do that another day, but continue practicing words. You've got to really be able to see the forest for the trees. And I think that was the first thing I had to do as I started to work on the calligraphy. Another major breakthrough. When I realized that the line paper, the paper that they use in school, is 3 lines. Because
Yeah.
I used to use the English type, which is just 1 line.
Oh, you have an English just in English just one.
Just 1 line. It's never
Oh.
grids.
Uh-huh, yeah.
It's never quadratic. It's just linear. So I only got exposed to quadratic notepads when I worked in Spain. But again,
Hmm.
I never used them as for handwriting, never, ever. And then I was really struggling with Georgian calligraphy. And then somebody said, I don't know where it was, but somebody said, but you're using the wrong paper. And I thought, what do you mean the wrong paper? Like, well, you need 3 lines. I thought, well, I can find 3 lines anywhere. I was obviously, you can see what, sometimes you're so stubborn. And I realized that they're actually specifically different
Yes.
heights.
Hmm.
And when I finally saw the right paper and I started to use the calligraphy, then it was a massive breakthrough for me. So that's the second thing, was that learning to use the right paper, extending the line, making some of in the main line, seeing the calligraphy within the 3 lines. I think I was writing unattractive Georgian, Mechedruli, uh, for a while. And my friends were super sweet. They were like, oh,
Oh,
that's nice. But
but
like,
yeah.
I can't read it. I was like, why can't you read it? I was super annoyed. But that was another tip. So for anyone that's learning, you've got to be able to use that right line paper. Find a copy, download a copy. Maybe Asia's got a link. I can provide a
Yeah.
link. You've got to basically print it out and start writing from there, because that really helps. And then there were the sounds. I wanted to add, when you said, gastronomy was important for me, and
Mm.
some words stayed. My first came from matsoni.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, just matsoni. It was a sound, and I had heard it because I quite like it. I was making my own kefir, and I was
Really?
interested in
Oh.
the
Hmm.
probiotic life.
Hmm.
And but matsoni was with this sound, and when I was buying it, when I was hearing it, it was the one that locked that sound, and I thought, I can reproduce that sound. And then from then on, I never forgot it. Cha cha.
Yes. That is.
Somebody saying cha cha's a dance.
Hmm.
It's not a drink. And I was like, oh yeah, the cha cha. But they were
Yeah.
like, cha cha is a drink. And I was like, oh. So you find that element, and emali, that was good. Because I know as in forest, but I was
Hmm.
never gonna make this like a . So I remember Matsoni bringing me the I remember Chacha bringing me the ch. I remember Emali bringing me the t and the k together.
Yes.
That was a 2 for 1. And that's when I started to impress my friends. They were like, "You've got
Mm.
it. Don't lose it."
Mm. You have the
And so
pronunciation. Yeah. So,
I
yeah.
started to feel so much more confident with my
Mm.
pronunciation. I could never have done my YouTube channel if I wasn't confident with my pronunciation. And my YouTube channel was 2 years after I started the interest. So it took me at least 2 years to really learn the calligraphy, to really learn the pronunciation and a couple of words, and be super pedantic before I even switched the camera on. Because I knew as soon as I put the camera on, it was wrong. I'd finish the recording and be like, That's right. That's totally wrong. But
Yeah,
that helped as well, recording myself, and that kind of thing. So testing myself, recording myself, asking my friends, and them just being really honest and saying, no. So be patient, guys. Whoever's listening to this podcast, be patient with yourself. You've got to hear those sounds and produce them, but be fair on yourself too.
yeah, that's as you mentioned with all the drinks, etc. This is also the way how I often advise, like to pick something whatever you normally would use. Like if you are into
Mhm.
wining and dining, if you are into traveling, just focus on the words and easy words, of course, that you would use normally in your language or other languages you speak. Yeah? Because then it is much easier than it is like artificial whatever someone wrote in a book and thought it will be useful. Just the best is also to make sure that you focus on what you're learning. Yeah, and as you mentioned that whatever you practice, I notice that often people they want to from the first moment they start reading and listening to Georgian alphabet, they want to make like the perfect sounds like say as Georgians would say, and not taking into consideration that there are also from region to region, it may vary a little bit how the words are pronounced, and also there are lots of jokes connected to that. If you don't know, ask your Georgian friends, for sure they will tell you
Mhm.
more about it. How
Yeah.
yeah they can make fun of like from different religions people pronounce different letters or different words. So this is also the first thing that for us, the foreigners, we should take into consideration and just start talking and just start listening, and then it just goes with the time. As the time passes and you practice Georgian, then it is much easier, I think, than with the pronunciation. So with the you mentioned also the levels of the letters. So this is also that I
Mhm.
noticed. I mean, I have my students, like when I teach Georgian, that sometimes people write like v or etc. on different levels. That I know what I
Mhm.
want to say, but normally it is a matter of practice, etc. So that is why also what I would advise, add to what you said, to take also into consideration not only the levels but also from like whether to start from left hand side and right hand side.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it changes completely how you can write. We have also some,
Absolutely.
yeah, I will link to the materials about this like
Mhm.
infographics that we have as well, because this is also the game changer that you can
It
write.
is a
Yeah,
game changer,
yeah,
and I think people skip it too
yeah,
soon. And I think that I made progress because I was very pedantic, and I really didn't think. Because if you consider my first attraction to the language was the alphabet,
yes.
I had
Hmm.
no intention of speaking it. I was already living in a German-speaking country. I was already bilingual, speaking Spanish and English. I didn't need it, but I just thought the calligraphy, and it was during lockdown as well, all that kind of stuff. Like I just wanted to do something that was nice, the pandemic and stuff. So everything was it was just for fun. But I really enjoyed holding the pen, making it look beautiful, writing my tattoo out and things like that. But I obsessed with simply handwriting
Mm,
for quite a while. And I believe that that echoes what Georgian kids do when they're young.
yeah.
I accidentally given myself a primary school kindergarten training on just handwriting,
Yes.
just for fun, you
Yes.
know. And no one was checking my work.
Mm,
But like I said, like that link that you provided would be very useful because anyone that thinks that they can skip it, think again. You can't skip it.
mm,
You've got to do it, and it might take months. And you'll do it until the pen hurts, and you'll show your friends, and they'll say that's ugly. You won't know why, and they'll say, like you said about the V, it's too fat. It looks like a three. It needs to be
mm,
thinner. I remember with oh my god, I struggled with
mhm.
making it that tiny curve and then that long curve, but
Yes.
not a three and not a V.
Not a bit, yes. That's
You know,
yeah.
that was the one that was the last one, and I went in order. I think and were the last two,
Hmm. No, so
and
that's
then it was a countdown, and then I could do every single one. I could hear something in Georgian in short words and write what I was hearing. And that was the first skill that I taught. And nobody was training anyone to do anything like that online. There were no books in that way training some like me at home. I want to use YouTube, you know. that such material didn't exist. That's one of the reasons why I created the channel. I thought if it didn't exist for me, it mustn't exist for other people. So what if I provide something that I would have used if I had the opportunity? And that's why one of my first videos was a notepad, my very first video, because it was such a game changer, it was such a breakthrough. I showed the English linear notepad, the Spanish quadratic notepad, and the Georgian one. And I was like, if you don't start here, save yourself the pain of me doing months of ugly writing until I realized the paper existed. And I think that's how I started. I didn't expect to do so many videos. I just thought a couple of things that I wasted time on, I'll put in the video. Like you can say if you're like, it's there.
Um,
It's there. Just so don't waste your time, you know? So I was kind of like, it was a way for me to compensate for the lack of good material and to fill the gap. To fill the gap. And I love teaching. So it took a lot of confidence for me. And I was only going to do the alphabet.
really, at the beginning,
And
you were just planning to do the alphabet.
I just wanted to do what I knew,
Oh,
Asia. I
yeah.
didn't know that much, you
Mm-hmm.
know? I mean, obviously, I must say that when I started the channel, of course, I was quite fluent at that time. I had traveled to Georgia at least 8 times. I'd spent a
Mm-hmm.
lot of time there. I knew the grammar essentially. And I just wanted to cover the basics, like the verb to be
Mm-hmm.
and just a couple of words, but generally focus on a couple of words, a couple of tenses. But it snowballed. It became my identity. It really became something which gave me a lot of pleasure. It kept me out of trouble, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And it was such an antidote to my life in Austria. I was getting very bored of German.
Oh. Mm-hmm. So how was it with Georgian language? Because as you mentioned, you started with the letters, and what was maybe more difficult than you thought at the beginning that it can be with Georgian, and maybe there was something that you thought, oh, that will be difficult, and it ended up being like from grammatical perspective or some vocab that for you it was much easier
Uh,
than you expected. Yeah.
I mean, what was difficult for me was obviously the statement, for example, like, oh, you just say what you see,
Oh yeah.
and
Hmm.
that not being the case, you know. Twali is not tuvali.
Hmm.
Tkwen is tkwen, you know. Um, Mshoblebi can often be shoblebi.
Hmm.
Things that were disappearing caused because I was learning the alphabet. So when things started to disappear, I was like, why this, why that, you know? So, and obviously you say to somebody and you say, but you didn't say Sacatavelo.
Where is my
You said
boo?
Sacatuelo
Yeah.
with a W.
Yeah.
And because it exists in the English language, I was quite, and that you probably said it and said, are you saying a V? And they go, yeah, yeah, no, you're not. Did you say mushoblebi or did you say shoblebi? And that kind of thing. So that I had to get over that pain barrier immediately. You're not going to hear what you're expecting to hear. And then in terms of the grammar, um, well, one thing, if I, it's just a breakthrough, I'm still going to do a video on it, was that English is learned in a past, present, future format. And because our grammar is relatively simple, it is very difficult to adapt to Georgian grammar. Screeves, you know,
Hmm.
speaking in screeves rather than it's a past simple tense, it's a past continuous tense, either or. The ergative tense, which I'm teaching at the moment,
Yes.
God, I just so disappointed that I couldn't understand it for years. Now
Hmm.
I get it. German wasn't helping me because the German relationship between dative, accusative,
It's not helping. Yeah.
nominative, it didn't help. It confused me.
Yeah.
Spanish, we don't have it. One thing that helped me, the past tense in Spanish ends with an E.
Oh. Hmm.
So like vi probé, in Spanish encontré. So most or a large proportion of Spanish past tense verbs end in e
Hmm.
with a little accent on the e. So I remember when I started learning past tense Georgian verbs, if they ended with e, I would always do the Spanish.
Yes, with English, this is different. Yeah, that's also one of my thoughts, because I noticed when I started teaching also not only Polish people, Polish speakers, or people who know at least a little bit Polish, but also foreigners. Then, from my perspective, foreigners, not Polish speakers. So that's what I'm saying. Like very often right now, that we from like Slavic, let's say, languages, we have much easier task with Georgian. It's much easier
Hmm.
for us to understand like the cases, as you mentioned. I think with the tenses as well, of course, like with scripts for everyone, it is tough to, and especially from the optative and and later on, like it's really, it's not to compare. You cannot compare it with anything else. But
Not with English, no. Brunva,
yes,
there are 7 cases in Georgian, Brunverbi. And I
yeah.
was thinking,
What's that?
what is that? What on earth
Yeah.
are we doing to every single noun? And oh, they have to look different because they're doing different things. And
Mm.
I thought, yeah, that's okay because English is context based or word order based. So it's almost as if, for an English language perspective, it's like you see a beautiful clock and you take it apart, all the different wheels, all the different mechanisms, you take it apart, but you can't put it back together again.
Mm.
Whereas if you have a Slavic word, perhaps structures in your language, you can start to put it back together again. Although it's a struggle with Polish, you can start to think, okay, that's a vocative case. I understand that. That's an instrumental case. I think I get that. That's a dative case. I think I understand that. So I think with Polish being, for your case, a bit of an advantage on how to reconstruct the clock. But for English, there was nothing at all. And tandebuli, these endings which have such a massive influence,
Mm.
postposition endings as well. All of those I had to really teach myself that they existed.
I just
That they
take it as a
exist.
dogma. Yes, it exists. I have to deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah, like they
Yeah,
exist,
yeah.
and what the hell? Like, how am I
Mm.
supposed to manage this? And something's really frustrating. I think what I loved the difference between Shoris and Shua, when I really started to study, and that's why I mentioned my Polish friend in the beginning. I asked him because he was like, "Oh, that's super simple. They do that in Polish. Polish grammar is really complicated." So I was like, "So this," and he hated it because he was like, "I stopped learning Polish when I was a kid.
Mhm.
I am not doing it in my free time just because you are learning Georgian." I was
Mm.
like, "Oh, come on!" And he's like, "Don't you
Honestly.
get it?" And I'm like, "No." And he was like, "I'm not interested." He said, "I gave up." He said, "It was hard enough. I hated it in school.
Mm.
I'm not doing it now." But he was a nice guy. He could see what I was doing, and his English was strong enough. And so I had to rely on other people. Obviously, I had friends that were Georgian as well, but they grow up. Georgian as a second language is a new concept.
Yes. No.
Your school and your materials help bridge that gap. I've noticed that's one of your approaches. It's taken as a second language because if not, they'll give you Jakub Gogebashvili Iremi
Yeah.
and you won't be able to read it, despite the fact that it's supposed to be for kids. The level of complexity to Iremi, one of the sort of Jakub Gogebashvili's work, which is the Bible, isn't it, for learning, I found myself unable to read any of the stories,
Mm.
the simplest ones.
No, that's. I think that
That
that's
was
also, yeah, the way when you have Georgian friends, and this is also great to practice with them. But what I notice as well, for myself, is that you have to tell them what you know, and that you don't know anything else. And for them, especially with the verb, this is what I noticed, that as in Georgian you can have different, let's say, in the most simplistic way, different forms of the verb. You can put into the verb like, what are you doing, for whom you are doing something, etc.
mhm,
And for Georgians this is like natural, that how they can say it. However, despite that, you may use a simpler form, but you have to just know it, that the foreigners may not understand it, that in a more complex way. Yeah, so that's also one of the options when you have like Georgian spouse or friends and you want to talk with them in Georgian, then just to put the boundaries right now and what you know and what you don't know. Yeah, that's what I noticed as well. Yes, that's because obviously from your perspective, maybe from English, maybe from Welsh as well, and it's the same. It is like for me a little bit with Polish because I taught Polish for some time. I have analyzed this language, although it is my
Mhm.
own. But if you teach your own language and you don't know the construct, just what you have learned at school, and you have no idea what other people in other languages they may not understand this concept. Like for some of my teachers, the Georgian teachers, it was a little bit shocking that we do not have this more like optative form that you don't have it in your language. Like no, we don't have
Yeah.
this concept in general. Yeah, so
Subjunctives in English,
yes, yeah,
no,
yeah,
you
and
know,
it is
it's that
differently.
kind of
Hmm.
thing.
Yes.
We find it that the yes, and so what happens is that we're in a gray area, you know, where English as a second language hasn't been fully developed. And I
Yeah.
guess that's another thing as well. Like I felt that Georgian language was rather isolated.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I've been 20 years in the profession and I barely know anything about it. And I thought that's just such a pity. Perhaps, and again, it was like, again, from a Georgian person's perspective, you're like, I've never heard of your country before. Your language is so strange. Your language is impossible to learn. So you can understand that from my friends were felt a bit like they don't belong in Europe. You know, it
Mm-hmm.
was hyper expensive. So you can understand from a Georgian perspective as well. They're like, well, why should I participate? You're going to just say that my language is like Klingon and
Yeah.
not value what is my identity. And I empathize with that. In Wales, the native language is Welsh. It's got nothing to do with English. But how many times do people think Welsh is English and I'm an English person? I mean, I'm over it. I don't get offended. But it is so I had a lot of empathy. So as I started to learn the language, I felt a little bit like my channel was an act of revenge, that I could enact a positive force and perhaps give, with 20 years of educational experience, a platform for this language to exist on YouTube for free in the English speaking language. That meant that anyone could give it a shot. And speaking to people that use English, not people that are English. Just if you're using English, you're going to need to hear it this way. And it sounds weird, but this is how you're going to get it done because this is how I understood it. And I've had people, I call them grammar Karens, who have written to me maybe privately or written to me and said, this is right, this is wrong, I think. But I could take that fully as free advice and I absolutely love it. I've made videos and deleted content. I've updated things. I've written things which I shouldn't have written. And even now, that's why I like the YouTube channel. Even now, people write to me about videos that I made 2 years ago. And they're like, is this because of this? And I think, God, you're struggling the same way I did. And you're asking the question in English and you're never going to get it. So
Mm-hmm.
I try my hardest to break. So when I started to make breakthroughs, the sense of pride, but then I thought, how do I explain it? So that was it. I think one thing I wanted to add was in English, for us, we have to figure out what we're doing with the root pudze. That's where English speaking people have to begin. You've got to see where that word begins and then what you're putting on before or after. And any kind of decoration, like Lego bricks, it starts here and it works either left or right, but you're in the same word. And of course, for an English speaking person, that's very difficult. If you speak Hungarian, that's common and normal.
Yeah.
But for English, it's not. Also, another thing with English people, we say I am, you are, var is enough, you
Yes.
know.
Yeah. That's.
That's another thing. Disconnecting from the need to use your pronoun. Another tip that I was giving. It seems so commonplace, but English was so highly necessary to say I am, which is a massive hurdle when the verb itself, for example, like the la paracob,
Mm-hmm.
that's what you want to say. The ver is enough.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So those things. So English language causing barriers that once you've explained it, it's then being accustomed to that. explanation and just settling and just accepting it, not saying like, oh, well, why is it like that? That's another thing about learning Georgian. Stop asking why. It's not an Indo European language. You might find an explanation in your own language. You may find a book, a teacher, an established material. Why is it like this in Polish? It's been discussed for decades. Georgian is completely a desert. So stop asking why, you know.
Yes.
Ask why, but stop stubbornly expecting something to change, as if Georgian's going to suddenly adapt to Indo-European languages. It's not. You've just got to swallow your pride and go and just almost never say meh unless you really need to.
Yes, especially as I mentioned earlier about hearing, like you know that something may sound or should be written this way, and when you hear without the pronoun, it may be confusing as well. Especially when the people at the beginning, also that goes for Polish people as well. We start with learning the pronoun and the verb. Yeah,
Mhm.
and then to skip it just when you start a conversation, and remember that whenever you don't have the pronoun, still the verb like works in the sentence. Then it is also kind of a breakthrough, or you have to go through that path simply. Yeah, so especially for example, I often suggest at the beginning to start with the personal pronouns, even if Georgians are not naturally using that, they will say just var instead of my var. But when you
Mhm.
start learning, like within the first, let's say, months, you have to just have a way to remember those words, because it will be general a pity to forget how to say I in Georgian
Mhm.
after a couple of months. However, take into consideration you may not hear it when someone is saying, yeah. So that's a tricky
Yeah.
part as
Like
well. But if you get that, like you have that in mind as a rule, and then you practice, so that's it comes much easier, I would say.
it is sometimes one step forward, two steps back, isn't it? Because let's say you are
Mm.
an English speaking person and you've decided not to say me var, and you're just going to say var, and you're like, it's a V, I'm in the chat. And then they just say war, and there's no V,
Yeah.
you know? So once you've tricked yourself into not saying it, you'll hear somebody say a different letter. And I think that's when people give up. I think Georgian is quite a struggle because the the opportunity for you to say, listen, this is too difficult, I'm not going to go any further, is quite high.
Mm.
Lack of materials, lack of exposure, the difference, no matter what language you speak, Georgian isn't going to be easy to learn. But then again, it's like once you just go with it and like, okay, you're not always going to say var, you might say war, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like tavisu pali war.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's
Just get used to it. So people listening to your podcast, forget the v. It's there. You need it. But don't rely on people saying it because they're not always going to say it. And if they don't say it, move on.
mm-hmm.
Don't make a big deal out of it. The only thing you make a big deal out, for example, when people make mistakes, because Georgians also make a lot of mistakes.
Yes,
They
a lot of
don't agree
mistakes.
with each other
Yeah.
as well. There are quite a lot of mistakes. Albad,
Mm-hmm.
carga.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
There's a
my
couple. There's a
yeah.
couple that are constantly appearing. And of course, everyone says that's so wrong. But there's other things like mara, magram,
Yeah.
echla
Mm-hmm.
instead of achla, zan, not zalian. So you're talking about things which are not considered to be mistakes, actually. They're just the way it's modernized. So, in fact, it's correct. But if you're learning in that way, that you're looking for reliable things, Georgian will always give you something to rely on. And then for some reason, do something completely different with it. So it's always that one step forward, two steps back. I think you have to take it really, 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 really slowly. The pleasure is in the slow growth. I think that's what's given me satisfaction. I never thought I need to really quickly speak Georgian fluently. That was unachievable. I don't think I have the skills
Mm-hmm.
to do it at a rapid pace. So yeah, that was another thing as well. Just sometimes you have to unlearn what you've learned and just think, I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
I find it difficult to say mara and not magram. I find it difficult to say ekla and not akhla. You know, I do. I feel that it doesn't belong to me. I'm not a native speaker. So I believe that although people say, yes, we don't use that anymore, I find myself until I've crossed a certain boundary of fluency, I'm not. Then again, Asia, I don't use those things in Spanish either. The
Mm.
shortcuts, I don't speak like that. I don't speak street level Spanish. I don't speak street level German. I don't speak street level English. So I'm in my own way. I've managed to keep it academic in a way. So I almost don't allow myself to use street talk. I know I should, but
Really,
it's just
you
the way
have
I
that
am.
like feeling in you, because I think that I don't have the need. I have the need to understand it, but for me, saying "dan," it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so ashamed of myself. Somehow, like, no, I cannot. This is not my Georgian. My
Yeah, it's
Georgian,
not mine.
yeah.
I'm like, that doesn't belong to me. You know, like I'm not allowed to say that. It's like gonna,
Yeah.
wanna, shoulda, all those English
Yeah.
short forms. You think, oh, I'm just never going to say that. Like that's for native speakers to say.
Mm-hmm.
But I do find that echla, I'm probably never going to say.
Mm-hmm.
I'll write it. So that's another thing as well. It's
Yes.
like something's testimony to your level of fluency. I haven't reached the level of fluency to use relaxed, but it's also knowing what is a mistake and what is the modernization of the Georgian language. What's the new words? Luckily, lots of new words are English as well. So English speakers do have an advantage.
Yes.
English words are constantly being imported. They're not importing Polish words.
No, unfortunately not. No,
They're
you
not.
should, Georgians. You should import some
Start
Polish,
importing Polish
one.
words, please.
At least
Make it
one.
easier for us. But
Yeah.
they don't. They won't. They simply English is far too
Yes.
prolific. So that's another thing for English speaking people. So much is given to you because English is a dominant language that
Exactly.
you will find many things will be with an just put an I. The majority of them are nominative E words. I had my hair cut recently. I said paid for a
Mm-hmm.
fade
Mm-hmm.
because I wasn't sure how to say graduated hairline. That was no. And I get a little bit nervous as well. I'm in the hairdresser. I don't know why. It's not the scissors. It's just I
Mm-hmm.
just don't want them to ruin my style.
No.
So I said like null, shekrav, and then fadey. And I just thought I'll just try saying it in English, but with a Georgian f
Mm-hmm. Yes.
as a p
For
and an e and cross my fingers. And the guy was like, "Oh yeah," and he did a great job. So there's that thing as well. Like we're so lucky if English is your first language and you've absorbed so many English words. Learn to adapt. Like I just mentioned, change the f to a p, put an e on the end, and cross your fingers. You might be
yes.
lucky.
Yeah. There are
You
many
might be
words like that, as you mentioned. Like one of my favorite ones is kashi. I just love this word.
lucky.
It's so funny. It's like kashi. Like when I heard this for the first, like, what do you want? Once again, in Korea, for example, I'm very used to, because I speak Korean as well a little bit. So I'm used to those words, like how they change it. But in Georgian, I think last couple of years I started listening to words like this coming from English. Like I'm laughing like this, like Georgian English, Jonglish, or something like this.
Mhm.
Yeah, and you can use it. You can use it, and this is the advantage for you. That's for sure. I have an impression after we are talking about some like tips and tricks, which is great. You have to put the. You can listen to this episode once again or read it because it will be in the art. It is in the article version as well, and come back and write down all your tips when you are listening to us, and for you to have your study plan. And I wanted to ask you from your perspective, like we have some disadvantages and advantages, no matter the language, because it doesn't mean that for Polish people, this is like very easy one. I'm
Mhm.
like there are things that are shocking, some things we can relate to, etc. But from your perspective, like this idea that Georgian is a very difficult language and almost no one can learn it. Is it like true or false? How would you approach from your perspective, like taking all that into consideration?
Mm. That's such
It's
a good
like
question because I
philosophical
think
question to the end.
no, it's really
Yeah.
good and it's
Yeah.
not the first time I heard it. I suppose, for me, it's what does the Georgian language return to
Mm,
you? When you learn Spanish, Spanish people are so engaged with the fact that you've bothered, you know, and you make that massive effort, and it brings you all that music, and the entire world is suddenly Spanish,
mm,
And I really felt so much pleasure with that. On the other hand, German didn't return that much. it didn't give me that much pleasure. People were not that much interested in the development of my German. And although it was a difficult language, I also felt that I wasn't getting any kind of like emotional reward.
Mm.
And to a certain extent, despite the fact that I love German, I didn't feel that much enjoyment while living and speaking in German. And then, despite the fact that Georgian is extremely difficult to learn, the answer to the question is yes, it is extremely difficult to learn. Almost nothing that you rely on in your mother tongue is going to help you. Even if you have structures pre existing, you still got to change them. You still got to change the entire chip. But the reward for doing it is immense. You feel your own sense of personal satisfaction that you've achieved something that you thought was difficult. And at the same time, Georgians are very happy to hear one or two words. And the bigger the effort, the more the return. And so I felt that my integration here has been accelerated because I've made such an effort. And I watch movies and I listen to songs and even like getting things wrong, like that, uh, Cartuli Disco song, which is super trendy at the moment. I made the effort of learning that song, right?
Mm. That sounds
Trent
yeah.
Querenas, Chamodian. Uh, all my friends said, I hate the song. I never want to hear it. Don't sing it. Don't learn it. After I'd already spent days.
Oh.
So some things a little
But it
bit like that.
stays
So
with
it
you,
is
you know, everything that you learn stay with
It
you.
does. It does stay with me, but it was completely
Yeah.
pointless. And so I
Yeah.
think that's another thing as well. It's like knowing where to point knowing where to direct your attention to.
Yeah.
There are poems that Georgians will read that they've never heard. And I think that perhaps then the other part of my answer is that it is difficult because the source material is abundant, but it's not filtered. They don't say this is business English, this is academic English, this is English basic skills, this is A1. Even the A1, A2, B1, B2, it's quite undefined. I know because of my other skills in other languages more or less what an A2 in Georgian is. I can understand what it is, but it's very undefined. So that makes it even more harder. You cannot necessarily rely on anything that you rely on learning any modern language.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to walk into a very gray area. That's why your channel, your books, and your material for me were so valuable because they pointed me in the right direction and they had already been filtered for me to use. It was a perfectly lined up direct. The explanations on your website
Yeah.
about the grammar were done in a way that was accessible.
Mm.
So yes, it is an incredibly difficult language to learn. Yes, controlling the phonetic will leave you breathless.
Yeah.
But the reward for achieving so much is the benefit of the reaction for the Georgian people themselves because they know how much effort you must have made to get that far. And I think that perhaps if you learn other languages, you don't get that reward. I would say, namely, in my case, it was German. I just didn't feel, after 10 years living there, you know,
Mm.
what was it all for? So, yes, it is hard. It is extremely difficult. And everything's going to confuse you. But the best thing is that any skill that you learn is you always start off without knowledge. It's how you determine your own self satisfaction and thinking, I nailed it. When I started to see complete words in Georgian, I was over the moon.
Mm.
I could see the days of the week and I knew which ones they were. They were almost a year and a half of my life, and I was just never like Sekva Krida and
Mhm.
Shabati. The other ones, that's why I named my YouTube
That's
channel
what I wanted to
Paraskelia.
ask. Yeah, this is the question probably many people ask themselves, like where the Paraskevia comes from. Was it like any idea about these words, or just you thought, oh, let's have it Friday?
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't just Friday. It was
Okay.
ba, ka, and then a aris.
Oh, okay.
It contained three things which I thought were quite challenging. Number one,
Mm.
strong pa, ka, and then the fact that it is Friday,
Mm.
becoming aris at the end shortened to a, I thought those three things have to be learned. Without them, so I thought I'm going to name my channel with a challenging word.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Okay.
if I called it, for example, iremi,
Mm-hmm.
right? Something that was just relatively easy. It wouldn't be. I wanted the name of the channel to show and reveal the challenge that you're going to have. You are taking on. If you can't even say the name of the channel, then you're going to have to try harder
Mm-hmm.
because paraskeria is more complicated than it looks. And that's why when I shrunk it down to pa, ka, a, I wanted people to see focus, laser focus on those three aspects in one word, because you're going to see many aspects in one word. So that was the origin of it. Secondly, um, I was working full time in education, and I thought I'm not going to be able to make videos and publish them whenever I wanted. And I needed a strict schedule, and I thought
Mm-hmm.
Friday will be my deadline.
Great. I hope that's for those of you who are listening or watching us right now on YouTube. So I hope this will be like a boost of motivation. The whole your story when listening
Mhm,
to that and how to approach Georgian language if you're struggling and maybe this is not something that you know from your language or something is new. So I do think that it is not easy. Sometimes I'm not that eager to say that it's very hard. I think the problem sometimes with Georgian is that as you mentioned, there are not as many filtered materials. You never know when you buy
mhm,
a book. Very often, let's say, because it changes. I had to like say it openly that it changes right now, and there are step by step. Being created books, not only ours but also the ones that you can buy like hard copies in Georgia, which are already more or less relying to the levels like A1, A2,
mhm,
etc. Especially after the official documents from the Ministry of Education, which more or less gives us idea what should it be there. However, still it is not every book follows this pattern. It's a little bit, they say, freestyle sometimes with different books, and you may see it's this alphabet, and then you have past tense, and you never know like
mhm.
what happened here. So that is confusing as well. I think that sometimes it's even it's like catalyzes this idea. It's even making stronger the idea that Georgian is hard because if you open an alphabet and then you have different forms that you have like no idea what happened and what happened with this verb, yeah. So where to start even analyzing. So then it may trigger also the thinking. So it's good also to start really with small steps, as you mentioned, and to
Mhm.
practice that and I only then go further. Yeah, so that's a great story. Yeah, I
Yeah.
thank you.
I was
Thank
going to
you
say
very much.
it's the same thing that happens in English, though. If you think about it, when you look at English pronunciation, you compare to
Yeah,
American English and then British English, and then they say we have a e i o u, but we also have and and
yes, yeah.
and and We've got another 12 vowel sounds that they never teach you in school. So then you learn the English five vowel sounds, but then you realize there's another 12, and you think you've literally got 17 vowel sounds. If that was what you were told at the beginning of English, and that most of the words that you are writing will not be pronounced the way that they're said,
Yes.
wouldn't you say English was difficult and impossible?
Mm,
Yet at the same time, because it's been codified so well in a pedagogical way, that the approach to the English language, despite the phonetic irregularities, is quite standardized. And so slowly but surely you get there. So I think that's why Georgian is considered hard. But I think English can be equally as hard. Just now that gradually the pedagogical standardization of the Georgian language is starting to become much more standardized and relevant, which is another question.
yeah.
It is actually more easy than it ever has been. So if you
Yes,
are going
that's
to
true.
learn, now is the time, because 6 years ago when you started Asia, it must have been exceptionally difficult. So now really is the time.
Yeah, so
So,
I remember when I was buying because I started learning Georgian in 2008. So it was like
right.
ancient times. Yeah, there was just one book that was more or less like English style, modern style, and that was Biliki. And I love this book till now. I have still with me and three parts of it. Yeah, but that time there was like everyone was saying like, "What do you want? You want to study Georgian? Like why?" Exactly. There were
Yeah.
no like
How bored are
internet was
you?
there not that popular as it is right now. I mean,
That's also
you
true.
know, it's like, I sound like very old person, like old lady, but it was the case there. So right now, yeah, as you mentioned, now is the time, because as you have also a great channel, I do advise you to go and watch and learn with that. I love your stories, by the way, because right now you have fairy tales, I noticed, and I love this.
Yes.
Yeah, I watch them. I watch them, and I really like and enjoy them. So I do encourage everyone who's listening to us, go to the link that we will have in the show notes, and go to see if you haven't seen it yet, and also use it as an additional study material, and not only study Georgian, because I think this is also an element of culture, etc. As you mentioned,
Mhm.
not only the grammatical part, but to use the language to tell a little bit what's like with the fairy tales, yeah, the fairy tales also that we know from other countries. So that's a great job that you're doing. Fingers crossed
Thank
for
you.
next like
You
thousands
too.
and yeah, thousands of subscribers and followers, and next
Mhm.
thousands of videos. Why not? I as
Why not?
your subscriber, I can wish myself that. Yeah, lots of videos as well on YouTube. That was awesome to have you here. Do you have maybe add the last ideas, thoughts, or tips for our listeners about Georgian language for us to complete with our episode?
Like my videos, subscribe to my
Yeah,
channel,
yes,
make comments, like I love it. It's a very small community. The Georgian as a second language learning community is quite
mm,
small. So
that's
I'm
nice.
very much always prepared. If you have a question, you can ask that question on that channel. And that's why me and Asia are talking today. The community is quite small, but when you've got people that's equally as passionate as you, we understand what stage you're at. So if you have even the most basic question, watch my video, write a comment. If I can't find an answer, I will find you the answer because it benefits me too and for all future readers. So at the moment, I would say, yes, participate as a community and buy the books, support the people that are writing materials because it's really not. I don't necessarily need Asia's book, but I wanted to support because I thought if I don't support, then I'm going to cut off a supply of valid material. And then actually, when I went through all of your work, I was like, "God, those examples are really interesting. They're so fresh, they're so new, they're so relevant. They really freshened up, and it was completely worth the investment." So the thing is that invest in your materials, invest in your teachers, invest in your time, learn to write the calligraphy well, and don't be so
Right.
hard on yourself if you're not saying the words right now. They will come, and you will surprise yourself. And even your own handwriting will probably improve. So yeah, watch our material, take part, be an active participant. Don't be afraid to say something. Don't be afraid to ask for advice and help. And get a teacher as well.
Yeah,
I've had
that's
two. Like I
oh.
really never regretted that. That was really a massive breakthrough. Yes, there's lots of material online. Yes, you can do things for free. But there is going to be a moment where if you're genuinely committed, there's nothing wrong with employing somebody that knows what they're doing so that you can perhaps transcend one of your own barriers, because that's another thing which I definitely did and appreciated. And it was something which I feel that people are reluctant to do. I don't know why. Because
Mm-hmm.
well, I can just use an app or I can just do it online and maybe I don't have to pay. And I was like, well, that's never going to work. You mentioned about materials. I mean, the amount of books I bought that were relevant because they were just all the material didn't work. Suddenly, finally, material is coming out. It's worth the investment. So go ahead and invest in it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure
Right.
you and we probably spent quite a lot of Larry on things that we just will never need again.
Yes.
But getting the professionals involved, it's a team effort. So if you like my channel because you're entertained, great. If you like the didactic and the way that you produce your work, Asia, then follow Asia's work as well. Everyone's here for the same thing. And if you see me in Batumi, say Gamar Joba, Mr.
Yeah.
Smith,
So thank you very much for joining me here today.
Ara
I think
Priest.
it's thanks, Dalian Didi Madlaba, Madlab. Yeah, so that was great journey. I think not only from for your journey of Georgian language, but also how to learn and how to teach as well, and not only Georgian but other languages. Great. Thank you very much for joining us today in the Caucasus podcast.
Nachondis.
Nachwam this.
Bye.
So, how was it? Did you like our conversation? Have you found anything in particular for you to use immediately when you start learning Georgian language? I hope so. And what was that? Let us know in the comments. So you can write there below and share your thoughts. Share what is your experience, maybe with Georgian, or maybe some tips and tricks you found particularly helpful that we talk about. All the links that we have mentioned in the discussion, so they are as well in the show notes of today's episode, that's for sure. And I hope you will stay with us for the next episodes as well of the Caucasus podcast. Remember, if you like our podcast, you can let us know by clicking I like it, by following us, depending where you watch it or where you listen to today's episode. And you can also, in some podcasting applications, you can as well rank and leave the stars if you like our podcast. So that is an option for you. Just a small request in the end of our today's episode. If you like this episode and you know already someone who is also learning Georgian language, just share this episode with them. Yes, so I'm more than sure it will help as well your friends in learning Georgian language. So see you in the next episode of the Caucasus podcast, or maybe in our series Georgian for Beginners that we'll have as well on our YouTube channel. And if you want to learn Georgian with us, we have several study books and online courses for you to use. So see you in the next episode. Bye bye.